Hello and welcome to a new lesson for English learners. This is a lesson in the series School for Life. This is a lesson for English learners in grade 7 and I'm Sanja Božinović, your English teacher. Our today's topic is extraordinary characters and we are going to talk about some extraordinary characters in literature and in life. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to understand a text from literature, a literary text. When you read it, it will be a text about some unusual qualities that people have, and you will be able to describe a person who looks or acts in an unusual way, and you will use a digital tool to do it. Let's see what I have prepared for you. To be ready for today's lesson, you need these materials. You need a pencil and a notebook because there will be some writing for you, and you will need your laptop or tablet because there is a digital tool to use for the final task. Let's see. The first task. 2 questions. What makes a person extraordinary? Can you think of a list of words that you need when you talk about somebody who you think is extraordinary? You can pause this video and make your list in your notebook. We usually think about what that person is good at, which talents that person has, what that person is talented at, and how that person impresses everybody, how we are impressed by what that person can do, how we are astonished. Here is a list of talents. Some are quite weird, unbelievable. Can you rank them 1 to 5? 1 being the most desirable, the one that you would like to have, and 5 the least desirable one, the one that you don't really care about. Fast reading. Would you like to be able to read really fast? Talking backwards. Slow motion walking. Observing every detail like detectives do. Would you like to be able to come to a scene which is quite complex and notice every little detail in a second and say what's happened there? Would you like to be able to do magic tricks? Rank these talents 1 to 5 and then choose one. If you could choose only one of these unbelievable talents, which would you choose and why? Choose one and think about your reason. Why would you choose that one? Look at the picture. Have you ever seen a similar picture? Do you know this character? Have you heard of Mr. Holmes? What's his first name? And what is his talent? Is it extraordinary? I mean the talent. Of course, his name is Sherlock Holmes and he lives in London and he lives in the books written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The books, the stories about the famous detective whose name is Sherlock Holmes. And his talents. Observation and deduction. He observes every tiny detail and he can make conclusion in a second. Let's see what I've prepared for you about this extraordinary character. The first scene from a story, and I've chosen the story A Study in Scarlet for you. And I've chosen to take this story, to take 2 scenes from this story from the web page called Project Gutenberg. You will see the link on the slide. On this web page, Project Gutenberg, you will find a lot of original books, original stories to read, to print, to use. Your task now is to listen carefully and to decide if the statements on the screen are true or false. I will read the statements first. Stamford introduces Mr. Sherlock Holmes to Dr. Watson. Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson are friends. Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson shake hands when they meet. That's something we don't do these days. Mr. Watson came back from Afghanistan. Mr. Holmes came back from Afghanistan. Listen carefully and you will find out which of these statements are true and which are false. Listen. Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, said Stamford, introducing us. How are you? He said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength for which I should hardly have given him credit. You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive. How on earth did you know that? I asked in astonishment. Never mind, said he, chuckling to himself. Look at the statements again and decide if they are true or false. I will read again. Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, said Stamford, introducing us. How are you? He said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength for which I should hardly have given him credit. You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive. How on earth did you know that? I asked in astonishment. Never mind, said he, chuckling to himself. Let's see. The first statement is true. Mr. Sherlock Holmes meets Dr. Watson. Number 2 is false. Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson will become friends, but they only meet now in this scene. Number 3 is true. Mr. Holmes talks gripping my hand with a strength, which means taking hold, because he wants to shake hands. Number 4 is true. Dr. Watson came home to London from Afghanistan. It was Dr. Watson, not Mr. Holmes, so number 5 is false. Your task now is to remember what you've heard and to complete these sentences using the 4 words you can see on the screen. Earth, are, keen, been. You can take some time, pause the video if you need more time, if you want to copy the sentences into your notebook. There are 2 words explained. The first person, that's Mr. Holmes, he speaks cordially in a friendly way, and he finishes his second sentence, I perceive. That's a bit difficult word. It means I observe, I notice, I have noticed that you have. And the scene goes, how are you? You have been in Afghanistan. How on earth did you know that? In this lesson, we are going to read one more scene from the same story, and I'll repeat, the story is A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and you can access the whole story on the page called Project Gutenberg, and you will find the link to the page on one of the previous slides. Of course, you can always read it as a graded reader by one of the publishers. It's your decision to make. When you finish reading the scene that you will find using the link on the screen, Holmes Explains, bit.ly Holmes Explains. If you copy this link into your browser on your laptop or tablet, you will access the story, the scene from the story. Read it carefully, and while reading, you have to understand, you have to find 2 kinds of information, 2 sorts of information. The first is both of them are about Mr. Holmes. The first is, how does Mr. Holmes does what he how does he do what he does best? Observing. Can you underline the parts in the scene, in the story, which tell you what little details he notices about Dr. Watson? And then, can you highlight the parts of the text in which you learn how he makes his conclusions, how he understands what he has seen. Observe, to notice, to perceive. So he sees little different details about Dr. Watson, underline them, and then he makes his conclusions. Aha! Highlight the parts of the text. Please pause the video, copy the link, and read the text. When you have read the text, you are ready to answer my 3 questions. In the story, Mr. Holmes mentions the train of thoughts. The train of thoughts is not a train, a real train, but his thoughts. What is it? What is the train of reasoning? And why was Dr. Watson astonished? If you need more time, if you need to read the scene once again, go back to the text and then come back to this video lesson. The train of thoughts are all those little details that he has noticed. The train of reasoning is how he makes connections between the details he sees and his conclusions, and he goes towards the solution of the problem, his conclusion, his deduction. And Dr. Watson was astonished. He couldn't believe, because it all happened so quickly. Sherlock Holmes is very clever. He does it in a second. Let's get back to the text to see if you have all the details. How does Mr. Holmes deduce that Dr. Watson is an army doctor, medical doctor who works for the army? Let me find it. Did you find the same details? He says, his face is dark, like the tint of the face, dark, and that is not the natural tint of his skin, for his wrists are fair, dark, fair, opposites. He has undergone hardship and sickness, as his haggard face says clearly. His left arm has been injured. He holds it in a stiff and unnatural manner. Where in the tropics could an English army doctor have seen much hardship and got his arm wounded? Clearly, in Afghanistan. And this solves the second question too. A warm place is called the tropics, and the third one too. A war zone is Afghanistan. If you would like to check, you can go back to the text to read and check that you have underlined and highlighted all the proper places. Now your task, your final task for today is play Sherlock Holmes. You can choose one of these 3 pictures. There is a middle-aged lady, there is an old man, and there is a girl. Choose a picture, look carefully, and play Sherlock Holmes. Can you spot 3 details which are unusual and which will help you describe that person as somebody extraordinary, somebody unusual, somebody out of ordinary? Can you notice 3 details that will help you tell a story about that person, invent a story about that person? Choose a picture, choose a person, look carefully, choose 3 details. if you need more words, if you need more ideas. I'm sure you can find them in your lessons about describing people, introductions. You must have that kind of topic from the first part of this school year. Then, when you have your 3 little details about the picture of your choice, you will create your short story. Your story shouldn't be longer than 80 words. Give your person a name and give that person a profession. And that's your introduction. You just state who that person is and what he or she does for a living. In the middle part, in the body of your story, you tell about the 3 details and your conclusions from those 3 details, something interesting, unusual about that person's life. And then in the conclusion, in the last part, what helped you work out the facts, how you made your conclusions, the Sherlock Holmes part. If you need more time, you can pause the video and go again through the instructions. Or you can check this checklist. When you have the first draft, please go to this checklist and check that you have remembered to include all the details you need in your short story. Check that you have named your person, that there is a name, and that your person has a profession. And that's your introduction. Check that you have described 3 details that help you guess the person's story, 3 unusual things that you have noticed about that person. That's your body of the story. And check that you have drawn conclusions about that person's life, like Sherlock Holmes. And that is your final part. Look at your story. Have you organized your text into 3 parts? Do you have your introduction, body, and conclusion? And finally, check that all the words are spelled correctly and that you have the punctuation in your story, all the capital letters, full stops, etc. If you're happy with your story, why don't you share it? You can copy your story to this Padlet. The Padlet will be accessed if you click on the link, if you copy the link into your browser, or if you scan this QR code. You will see the picture that is on your screen now on the right hand side of the slide. You will see the board, you will see the 3 pictures, and your opportunity to double click on the board and to add your story. And I hope you will find some more stories for you to read. My message for the end of today's lesson is to keep learning about extraordinary talents, to keep discovering extraordinary characters by reading new stories, and to make your lives extraordinary. Don't forget to learn English. If you have done all your tasks, this is the end of today's lesson, and goodbye until our next lesson.